All right, I believe we had left off in verses 43 and 44 of chapter 31. We'll try to finish that up tonight and see how far into chapter 32 we get. Now, you'll recall in verse 43, even though Laban has pretty much at this point kind of admitted defeat, his pride just continues to get the best of him, and he declares everything that's there his, but then says, well, what can I do about it? So that brings us to verse 44, which is his response. He says, so now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Now, this covenant and the stone marker that they set up to acknowledge it, this essentially is the demarcation that officially splits these two branches of this family. As far as we know from the biblical record, when they separate at this point, they don't see each other again. It says, Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Now, I'm going to stop there. Notice, it does mention Jacob and his kinsmen. Now, to our knowledge, the only kinsmen that Jacob had with him, other than the cousins and that had come with Laban, were his own kids. The oldest of which, by this point, would have been maybe about 12, 13 years old, something like that. So it's possible his older, 2 or 3 sons would have been old enough to help with some of this, but definitely not old enough to have been any kind of a threat to Laban. Yet, other than God's direct intervention, we don't have any indication that Laban had any reason to back off other than his fear of God, who had appeared to him in a dream. But as we're going to see as we continue reading, when they do separate, it tells us that some of the servants went with Jacob and some of them went with Laban. Now, prior to this, we have no indication that Jacob had any servants with him at all. In fact, when he and his wives and his kids took off, we're kind of given the impression that they left in a hurry and left with nothing more than what they could just gather together and then driving the flock ahead of them. This is the first, or will be when we get to that verse, the first indication that Jacob had any servants. So the question as we continue with this that we want to ask is it possible that all of the servants came with Laban, and once the disagreement had been laid out, do you think maybe some of Laban's servants kind of took their stand with Jacob, and that may have been part of what motivated Laban to quickly make a peace covenant when he realized that his entourage was beginning to side with Jacob? Just something to keep in mind. Because again, there are no servants mentioned anywhere when Jacob and his wives leave. But we're going to see later on there is a reference to Jacob and his servants. Anyway, verse 47 says, now Laban called it Yager-Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. That's the name they gave to this little memorial pillar. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore it is named Gilead. And Mizpah. In other words, it had two names where he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from the other. Now, the name they gave it, the Gilead, basically means the heap of witness, and Mizpah is a Hebrew word for watchtower. Now, there's an interesting little sidebar here in verse 47. Now, up until this point, the best we can make out is 20 years previous, when Jacob had gotten there, he had no problem communicating with them. Why was that?
They spoke the same language.
Spoke the same language. So why is it now, 20 years later, we have two different words, and it's clear the way this is listed that, in fact, I looked it up, and Yegar-Sahadutha is an Aramaic word, whereas Gilead is a Hebrew word. Is it possible that those languages have changed in 20 years? Of course, keep in mind, Jacob's been with them there in Haran. So why now do they have two different words for something?
Two different languages.
Well, maybe. I think it may be.
Family was in the process of adopting the language of the region.
Well, there's also the possibility here to keep in mind that Jacob's language wouldn't necessarily have changed. He's been, in and amongst the Aramean branch of the family. And clearly he could speak the same language that they did when he got there 20 years previously. But what this does indicate to us is that apparently it may have been two different dialects that had begun to develop. For example, we can sit down with somebody from England or Australia and communicate with each other, but we have different words for different things, even though we're still speaking English. For example, in our brand of English, what's a boot?
A trunk. Well, it is in England, it's a trunk.
Yeah, that's a big thing you put on your foot. But in England, what's a boot?
A trunk.
Yeah.
A car.
Trunk lid of a car.
I don't think they had cars at that point.
Yeah, it's not my point.
Actually, the boot is the trunk. The lid is the bonnet.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
And in America, a bonnet's a little lace-frilled cap that a little girl wears.
Well, and the same thing we can say about a biscuit. In England, anybody know what a biscuit is in England? A cookie. So we speak the same language, but there's dialect differences.
Chips and crisps.
Diaper.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to wipe your face with a nappy in England.
What's that?
I said you don't want to in England. You don't want to wipe your face with a nappy.
No.
Especially if it's been used.
It's a diaper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bonnie's sister is a boyfriend who's English, and he comes over sometimes.
Uh-huh.
And we've met him before, and we talk to him over the phone. We get about half his conversation.
And then she translates.
There's also a difference in dialect in different regions of, up there in Maine, if you talk to a maniac that's been there for years, it's hard to understand
That's
them.
what they call themselves in Maine, maniacs.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a reason for that.
That's a good one.
I didn't know that.
Well,
Point being-
that's why Stanley lives there.
To get back to the subject here, I think they did speak the same language, but what this indicates to us is they had been separated long enough that they might have diverged into two different dialects, and close enough that they could communicate and they were speaking the same language, but the linguistic differences had already begun in what had been about 3 generations. So that's just something to keep in mind, because what is one, after they departed at this point, we know that the two branches of the family never got together again. And what is one of the biggest things that keeps people apart?
Language.
Language. Because, for example, I've got relatives that live in Switzerland, but not only have I never met them, but wouldn't be able to communicate with them if I saw them, because they speak German. Connie's got the same thing. She's got distant relatives in Italy, but we couldn't communicate with them. So when languages begin to diverge, that's one of the biggest things that keeps people separated, even if you're related. All right, continuing on. Verse 50, it says, now this is Laban speaking. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold the pillar which I've set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass by this heap and this pillar to me for harm. Now, you had a question earlier on about this verse.
Yeah, but I understand now.
Just a memorial.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a boundary marker. It's what they've essentially set up. And setting up heaps of stones as a boundary marker was actually very common in that day and age. And we've already seen that just about every place that, every place Abraham went, what was one of the things that he did to mark the occasion?
Set up an altar.
Yeah, made out of what?
Stones.
Stones. Because it was a memorial marker.
Right.
So sometimes it was a memorial, sometimes a boundary marker. Now, notice Laban tells him that this is the boundary marker. I'll stay on my side, you stay on your side, and we don't cross over in anger one against the other. However, now not that this would have mattered at this point, because we're talking close to 1,000 years later, when during the kingdom of Solomon, what did Solomon do? Solomon conquered all that land, including the area that was now, the land of the Arameans. They're in northern Syria, where Laban is going back to. Solomon conquered that land later during his reign.
He had to get out of the house. He had too many women.
I'm going to let you defend that one.
So who's speaking in verse 53?
All right.
Sorry, got ahead again.
Okay. Well, no, it was the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac.
So that was Jacob speaking.
As far as I can tell, the first part of that verse is actually Laban is more than likely the one speaking. Now, what's the question here is, I looked this up, it says the God of Abraham, it says Elohim, and the Elohim of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us.
It makes sense that that's Laban then, because that's the first time he's ever been referred to as the God of Nahor. And
Yeah.
Laban would make that reference because Nahor was Laban's father, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But see, here's the question. Is Laban saying, like in our case, we would say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 3 different individuals, but we're talking about the same God. Is Laban saying that the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor is the same God? Or is he saying the God of Abraham, that's Abraham's God, the God of Nahor, his God, and the God of their father, Terah, Is he talking about 2 or 3 different gods here, or one God?
I'd say he's talking about 3 different gods.
That's the problem. You can't tell from the way that's written. There's no way to tell. And I looked this up, and there's no consensus of opinion with the commentators either. Some commentators claim that this is proof that that Laban and that branch of the family did worship the God of Abraham. And then I've read other commentators that say, no, this is proof they didn't. You just can't tell from the way it's written.
And we don't know enough about Laban's character to judge from that.
Well, even if, regardless of what kind of man Laban was, does not necessarily mean that Terah and Nahor didn't worship the true God, because we know Laban kind of went off on his own. Mario.
Well, the fact that Rachel's got his gods in her saddle tells me that he believed in different gods.
Well, unfortunately, you weren't here this past Sunday night, were you? Okay, let me back up and fill you in on the part you missed. The family idols, which Laban had, weren't just pagan idols. They were essentially a family heirloom that whoever possessed those was considered to be the patriarch of the family. That's why Laban got so bent out of shape when his idols disappeared, because as long as he had possession of those, that in their culture was an indicator that Laban was the family patriarch. The brothers got mad about it because if Daddy's lost his,
Patriarch.
his indicator that he's the family patriarch, well, which one of us is going to inherit the family fortune? So in the same sense that if you've got a particular family heirloom and whoever the family patriarch is says, well, when I die, I want you to have such and such. Well, a lot of families, that's their way of indicating that, I'm passing my heritage on to you. That's what they did with these family idols. So it is possible that Rachel stole them for religious reasons, but the most likely possibility, because if you'll keep in mind, one of the things when Jacob proposed to them to begin with, that he thought it was time for them to get out of Dodge, is they all agreed, we have no inheritance left because Daddy stole it all. And so the question remains, did Rachel steal them basically to give her daddy the one up, saying, well, you squandered our inheritance, so now we're stealing your idols so that, you have no cultural family, heirloom to pass down, which again would indicate why Laban chased them so far trying to get those things back. And Rachel just sat on them.
Is there any indication of what became of
Not that we know of.
them? Did they have pawn shops in those days?
Well,
They might have been able to sell to somebody.
if there was a way to sell something, that's probably been around since before the flood. But the bottom line is, we still don't have any indication at this point that Jacob knew she had them.
No, I don't.
But as to why she stole them, again, the question remains, was it for religious reasons, or was she just trying to get back at Daddy because of what those idols represented? So now back to the original question. Whether Laban believed in God or not, that's questionable. But I think the evidence still points to his father and probably his grandfather were in fact believers of God. But then again, what happens to any of us when one generation doesn't do a good job of teaching the next? And we certainly see that in between Nahor and Laban, with Abraham's brother, I'm trying to remember his name, started with a B. I'll think of it in a minute. He's only mentioned like once or twice in this whole episode. And after Rebecca had left the house, he's never mentioned again. So the question is, did he ever even teach Laban and his, rest of the family about true worship? That may explain why Laban was aware of God, but certainly was by no means a godly man.
If the household idols were a family heirloom, that means they were handed down to Laban from Nahor.
Possibly.
And Nahor got them from Terah.
Again, possibly.
So even though they were godly people, were they still clinging to belief in other gods as well?
And that's a possibility.
And why would Terah have given them to Nahor and not to Abraham?
But again, the question is, well, you just had thrown in one of the possibilities here is Abraham was the family patriarch at this point. Why didn't he get them if they were in the family at that point? Or is this something that they picked up in Haran
As a
after
new
they moved?
acquired culture.
An acquired culture in Haran, which may also explain why when they moved from Ur to there, God didn't want Abraham staying there. He wanted Abraham to keep going because, well, what happens anytime you live among pagans? You tend to
You get
become
tainted.
pagan.
Yeah.
You get tainted.
If it was a lineage thing, and if Terah had passed them on to Nahor rather than Abraham, maybe that's a sign that Abraham was the one who God was going to choose, because he wasn't the one clinging to those idol worship, where
See.
Nahor was.
See, the problem, and you're getting into the issue right now, is there's a lot of variables in here that we will never know the answer to. We can speculate, but the Bible just doesn't give us the details. All we can do is wonder. One of these days when you see Abraham, go ask him. Find out. I'm sure he'll tell you, but you may have to stand in line to get to talk to him.
Pretty long line, I'm sure.
All right.
You'll have a lot of time.
Well,
Good point. Okay. Where did we leave off? Okay. Also, you'll notice the last part of verse 53. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Notice again, this is another reference that we have, that the God of Isaac is now referred to as the fear of Isaac. So we have the concept of the fear of God introduced here as a title, which is rather interesting because that's not a normal title for God. We talk about the fear of God, but not as a title of God very much. Verse 54 says, And Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called the kinsmen to the meal. They ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his sons. Notice how it's mentioned here. Not his grandsons, kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So it's apparent at this point, Laban's kind of thrown in the towel because he knows he ain't going to win this.
This is the last we hear of Laban.
And this is the last we hear of him. But now it is the part that gets interesting. Now that Laban has moved on, and here's where I want to kind of take a break and show you some stuff here. Oh. Now, gonna fall over myself before this is over with. Yeah. Can you see it over there?
Yeah, pretty good.
Karen, you wanna sit here? See?
Need more light, but. Now, just so that you can visualize where all this is happening. Haran, and by the way, you've asked me before about the name Haran. Haran is the name of the brother.
Mhm.
But notice here how the town is spelled Harran. Again, in Aramaic, two different words. Very close in sound, but two different words. Alright, so over in this general area where you see Haran is where they were actually living at the time. When he escaped, this little blue line that you see going up through here, that is the Euphrates River. So from here to here was a distance of probably about 30 or 40 miles. So for him to have crossed the Euphrates River, probably that first day, they were running. The closest distance from Haran to here in any direction, again, at least that far. So he gets across the river. He would not have gone anywhere out here where you see the yellow. That's desert area. You certainly don't take a bunch of animals in your family out there. They never would have survived. So he would have gone southwest in this direction. And when it says that they stopped in the hill country of Gilead, this area where you see Damascus here, which of course is Syria, the hill country of Gilead is this area in here. So he went from here, crossed the river, and then south at least as far as here, which is a distance of about 300 miles. Now, his encounter with Laban would have taken place somewhere in this general area. We don't know exactly where, but somewhere in that area. But now, as we get into chapter 32, the next part of the story is he's going to encounter his brother Esau. Esau, all this time, has been living down in this area. That's another probably 400 to 500 miles farther south. And it says after he left that he sent messengers on ahead to Esau. They would have had to have gotten on horseback and probably gone just as hard as they could to get there in any length of time before him. But when he does finally encounter Esau, now you can't see it on this map because I'm going to switch here shortly, but around in here there's a river called the Jabbok River, is where his encounter with God was and where he sent his family on ahead of him. And since that map is a larger map that doesn't show that river, I am going to switch to this one.
I've got a question before you go on to the encounter with Esau.
All right.
The last chapter. When Laban decides we're going to build a heap here and this is going to become the divider between us, he's basically setting that divider up in Jacob's backyard, 300 miles away from his backyard. So he's basically saying, I got all the land to the north and you've only got from here south. So he basically kind of got one over on Jacob in that regard.
Well, he thinks he does because he's never been that far south, as far as we know. He doesn't realize that from there all the way to the desert south is another, 500 miles. So he's kind of selling himself short. He probably thinks he's getting a lot of territory. But as I mentioned earlier, during the reign of Solomon, Solomon conquered all of that. All right, now, this is the Dead Sea here. And the Jordan River going up. This is the Sea of Galilee. And here we go. Here's Jerusalem way down here. The Jabbok River is a little tributary that begins right here and kind of goes off in this direction. Jacob's encounter with God would have occurred somewhere in this general area, which, and again, you can see here, this is the hill country of Gilead. So he didn't go very far, maybe somewhere between 50 and 100 miles after he left Laban before he had that encounter. Once they crossed the Jabbok River, now of course keep in mind that Esau has been living way down here. And we're going to see in this next chapter that when Esau got word that Jacob was coming to see him, Esau takes off headed north with 400 men. Now, if you'd have been told that your brother's coming at you with 400 men,
Make you want to turn around.
you might be a little concerned.
Coming with an army.
Yeah, since the last time you talked to him, he told you he was going to kill you. So from here all the way this far north, and the encounter with Esau occurred somewhere in this general area here. Esau covered a lot of territory headed north to catch his brother, which occurred up in here. And again, just to give you all this in perspective, Jerusalem is here. So where that encounter occurred, we're probably still north of where Jerusalem is.
I don't see it labeled, but Edom is south of Moab. That's where.
Edom would have been down in here.
Okay, and Edom is Esau's home.
Uh-huh. Now, where Abraham and all the rest of the family had settled, here's Hebron here. That's one of the areas where they had settled. Beersheba is here. So they kind of fluctuated in this general area here. And when Esau left home, he moved eastward and was in here for a while, but then we know that the land of Edom was actually on this side of the Dead Sea for a while. So apparently he had gone around the sea. Of course, keeping in mind that that's assuming this map is accurate as to how far the Dead Sea did in fact go.
That time, yeah.
Because there's a good possibility the Dead Sea may not have been as big as they thought it was. But Edom ended up in this general vicinity. Now, what's interesting about all this is when God told Jacob to go back to Canaan, Canaan is this area on this side. All of this is Canaan. In his escape, Jacob stayed on this side of the Jordan River. That's not Canaan. So Jacob has yet to go where God told him to go. Quit you laughing over there. I see you laughing at me. All right. We'll start to cover just a verse or two, and then we're going to call it quits for the night. All right, chapter 32. Now, as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Now, at this point, notice it's plural. Angels of God. Not the angel of God, because who is the angel of God?
Jesus.
Yeah. This is plural at this point. Jacob had an encounter with, now, we're never told, did he see them? Did he, just surmise that they was there because God spoke to him? I mean, we don't know.
It says in the next verse they saw them.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm getting at when it says, did he see them, is, the question is, what did he see? That's why I'm asking, yes, it says he saw them, but I guess my question is, Did he physically see them, or did he have a dream, or
It doesn't say that they came and appeared as men.
does not say that they appeared as
like
men.
when Abraham interacted
Yeah.
with angels.
It's not that specific, but he did somehow saw them. The angels of God met him, and Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." So he named that place Mahanaim, which of course just means, two camps.
So this still indicates that he thinks of God in a place.
Yep,
Just God appeared here, so this is God's place.
yep. And that's what we're just going to cover. We're going to stop at verse 3 because that then begins the issue with the Esau. Let's just look at what Jacob is looking at here. Now, in his encounter up here with Laban, there were two camps. Laban was on one side of the mountain, Jacob on the other. After Laban leaves, what is the first thing that Jacob sees? Two camps of angels. It says he saw the angels, but it says Mahanaim. Mahanaim is actually a word that in Hebrew means two camps. I guess the question at this point is, why are those angels there? Was this strictly just to impress Jacob? Or is God letting Jacob know that he's keeping his promise and that unbeknownst to you, when Laban was here, so were we?
You were being watched over and protected.
Yeah, you were being watched over and protected. Remember in the story of Elisha and his servant? Remember when the king's army was surrounding him? Elisha's just going on about his business, and his servant's about to, go haywire because he thinks we're all about to be killed. Elisha's like, just calm down. And he prays and tells God, said, open this boy's eyes so that he can see what I see. And then he looks up and realizes that the whole mountain is covered with an angelic army, and realizes they're not alone at all. God's got the situation under control. Well, I can't help but wonder if that's exactly what God is doing with Jacob here, that now that this encounter with Laban is over with, God's just letting Jacob know that I had it under control. You weren't alone. Anyway, questions this evening?
I think I've asked them all already.
All of them?
Well, for tonight.
Mac, what'd you think?
Confused. Follow the genealogy.
Don't worry about the genealogy.
Yeah.
All right. Miss Mario, would you leave?